Said this before, but you're going to hear me talk about the ending because the ending is always important. But you're also going to hear me talk about a little bit about her life, because she wasn't invisible. I want you to know that.
You want to start? Okay. Lori introduced me, so you know I'm Sheriff Robert Evenson. Public speaking is not my strong suit, so I've got a little prepared statement. And then we're going to get into some details. It's good afternoon, and thank you all for being here. We're here today to talk to you about the conclusion of the case that has spanned nearly 34 years. And it's very important to realize, and very important with these ladies, that you never give up. Never give up. In 1990, the body of a young woman was found on a back road between Pineville and Anderson, and investigators began working. But 34 years is a long time, and the faces of the investigators have changed, but the focus didn't. 4 different sheriffs, many different detectives, and thousands of leads, hundreds of lab examinations, good information and bad information. And sometimes years passed with nothing new, with no new leads. Nearly 20 years ago, Lori asked me if she could work on this case. We had absolutely nothing to lose and everything to gain, so she started working. And for 20 years, Lori worked on it. And she kept working, and she reached out to all over the country looking for people who could contribute and help. And she worked for years at a time when it seemed like there was no promise or progress, let alone success. But she never gave up. Rhonda was by her side and proved invaluable. And finally, within the last 5 years, things took off. Grace Doe was identified. Lori and Rhonda now had a name, and Shauna. And with that name came more information. New leads led to more new leads, and we're here today to talk about the solving of this long-standing case. And then I'd like to introduce Lori Howard. She's been the detective that has worked on this for the last 20 years.
Thanks, Robert. I'm just gonna read this statement because it's important that I read the statement, but then I'm also gonna elaborate on how we got to where we are.
Lord, they need those up there.
Oh, sorry, I need to move them somewhere where I can actually see here. Let's do this. Okay, I'm gonna start out, Shauna Garber, that's how she was born, Shauna Garber, and we later learned that her name was Shauna Harvey. She'd been adopted. It was a failed adoption. We, for the longest time, couldn't figure out why there wasn't a missing persons report. It certainly dampened what we were trying to do. I knew that there must have been a problem early on because she was nowhere in the system. Couldn't find anybody looking for her, but I didn't realize there were people looking for her. We learned that much later on. But the press release says McDonald County, Missouri detectives have identified a suspect, now deceased, in the October 1990 murder of Shauna Garber. Shauna was born March the 1st, 1968 in Iola, Kansas, and at 6 years old she entered the foster care where she remained until she aged out of the foster care system. And it was determined through a statement made by her caseworker that once Shauna aged out, she went to live in the Bonita Claremore area in Oklahoma. Detectives were made aware that she was living in the area and being transported to and from a work program there, and it's believed that this is what brought her to McDonald County. And that was important because that was the other piece of the puzzle. Even after I knew what happened to her finally, I couldn't figure out what brought her here. And that was one of the last pieces that came together. So between 1990 and 2020, many leads were followed regarding missing females, but all the subjects were excluded, and the detectives continued to work on the case. We're told that it may be by the grace of God that her identity would be solved. And she became Grace, and that's a huge part of this story, but I worked on this case primarily after hours because I was working all day long and sometimes most of the night, and then there were times I would, and this is going to sound a little gruesome, but I'm going to be honest with you. There was a time after I found her skeletal remains that I had absolutely no idea how I was going to get her DNA in the system. And so one night I sat on the floor at the sheriff's office and I pulled her molars to send them to the University of North Texas Health and Human Sciences at their direction. They told me what needed to happen, and that's what happened. And it was actually that day that Detective Wise came through and she said, "What in the world are you doing?" And I said, I'm finding DNA the best way I know how, and we ultimately got DNA into CODIS. So that was a big moment, gruesome story, but you do sometimes what you need to do to get the answers that you need. So we know that Shauna's legal name is Shauna Harvey. However, she was born Shauna Garvey, and myself and Detective Wise have been able to develop a long-standing suspect in the murder of Shauna Harvey. And through statements, sources, witnesses, pounding the ground and driving people absolutely insane for 30 years, we finally have the answers that we needed. And I said that to say, a lot of you have said this is going to sound at the end of this like a thank you tour, because there's so many people to thank. We didn't do this by ourselves. And it's also going to sound a little bit like an apology tour to all of those people that we absolutely did drive crazy. There were times I would call the medical examiner's office in Boone County, and they would be like, oh, it's you, and we've looked. And I would say, could you look one more time? And they did. And 3 years into those phone calls, I received a message from Boone County that said, okay, come get her. So that was important. There's a lot of those little stories along the way. We did go get her. And I brought her back. And then I thought, now what am I going to do? Because I need to know what she looked like. I'm never going to figure out who she is without knowing what she looks like. So ultimately what happened is more begging and pleading and driving people crazy. We went to the hospital, the local hospital, and they were so gracious and good to us. And they said, okay, if you want to bring her in, and they gave us the protocol for doing so, we'll give you MRI photos. And that's the best that we can do if you need to ship those off to Canada to have a forensic reconstruction. So that is how she came about. That's the photo that you're going to see, the forensic reconstruction. It was done on MRI that was donated from our local hospital. And at the time, I didn't realize this, but that was the first time that had ever been done. And it's a remarkable image of what she actually looked like. And I can say that because her sister's sitting in the back row. So I know that now. You've heard us say that we have papered all of Kansas and most of the United States looking for a photo of Shauna. I can't find one, and I do get emotional about that because this lady had a hard luck life. She was set on fire when she was 3 years old by her mom, and after that she wound up in a foster care situation, and it was a failed adoption because she had some issues, a lot of issues, who wouldn't? And she bounced around from foster care to foster care, and I'm told that wasn't a successful bounce. Ultimately, she aged out of foster care, and she ended up in McDonald County, and we know how that went as well. She's only 22 years old, and I don't think she ever had an ounce of joy in her life. So you're going to hear me talk about this ending here with the suspect, but you're going to hear me tell you that she was somebody. She was important to me. She was important to us. This is not my only case, but it was an important case. So I'm going to read you the ending here because it is the ending. Taufi Reeves, he's a local. He was known to the community and to law enforcement. And if Reeves was still alive today, charges of first-degree murder would have been requested from Malia, the McDonald County prosecuting attorney. And I have her assured she would have filed them, based on the evidence that we have. So, we didn't take this lightly. As a lot of you know that we've been to see lots of serial killers, lots of local people. We've sat down across from the likes of Dennis Rader on Torture or Kill, picked his brain for almost 5 hours. And the media really wanted us to say that it was him. And I'm not going to lie about that either. There was a tremendous amount of pressure for us to say, oh yeah, it's him. And I think she and I were the only two in the world at that point that said, no, it's not. And it wasn't well received, of course, but it's out there and it's not him. And that was important to me because it was wrong, and I like to get things right. And the other thing is because I didn't want her tied to that narrative. she'd had enough, and that was wrong, and I never wanted to see her name in conjunction with Dennis Rader. Now, what happened to her was equally gruesome, but I just didn't want her name attached to that. So that's that. Talfie. Talfie did not just come onto the radar last week, last month, last year. Talfie Reeves has been on the radar and in those books, this is work product you see here on the table, since 2010. I took the case in 2008. He came to be because I received a letter from former Donald Schlesman, the sheriff of the county at the time, and he said, look at this. And it was a letter that detailed a very gruesome, horrifying death of a young woman. It was very specific. But I didn't know about Shauna. I didn't even know about Grace. I didn't know about that story. I looked into the letter. I did the very best I could with it. It was still years old at that point. And I couldn't confirm what was in the letter. But I put it up, and much later on, when I finally learned about Grace and Shauna's case, the letter came back to mind. So I put it in the file. I did some follow-up work with sources and statements and pulling those threads that I had. And ultimately, it led to where we are today. So that's not to say we didn't look at everybody twice. We did, and we have, and we've been everywhere doing it. Lots of suspects. Lots and lots of interviews and pounding the pavement. So we're 100% certain we got the guy. What breaks my heart is he's not alive. And I say I know he has a family and people that loved him, but he should have had to pay for what he did. Maybe he is, I don't know. But we do have the right guy, and a lot of you are saying, well, how do you know that? We know that because we stepped back and looked at the file again. When we came back from Osage County interviewing Dennis Rader, because you learn from everyone, we learned from him. We learned from Larry Hall. We learned from just about everybody. But what we learned is to go back, and we did. And this time around, it was much more successful because I didn't have people that were afraid to talk about our local suspect. And rest assured, I still have people today that are afraid to talk about this man who's no longer with us because there's other people still around. So you're going to hear me talk about, we have 6 sources, 6 corroborated individual sources that are not related to Talfie that have given us statements that we have been able to verify that he is responsible for Shauna's death. He took her in an old black Ford truck that is consistent with what we know went up that hill that night. It was a loud truck with no muffler. We have a witness to that. We know who the truck belonged to. We know it went up that hill that night and 2 doors slammed. We know he bound her with the cords that were in the back of this truck because that was convenient. That's what was in the truck. It was an old farm truck. He raped her, and we know that because we have a witness who was terrified in 2010, 2015, 2017 to talk. But eventually all 6 sources came forward without knowing what happened in regards to each individual person. Nobody knew what the other was saying, and we were able to verify that it actually did happen. He raped her, he bound her, and he overdosed her to shut her up because she was screaming so loudly that it began to scare him in that valley because it echoed. So we know that that's how she passed. But you're going to say, well, could that have happened any other way? No, because my witness left and saw Shauna within hours of what she knew happened. So, with those sources and with our witness, and I'm not going to give this person's name, and I don't even think it's prudent to even tell you that I would. I'm not going to. I'm fearful for her, and she's fearful for her. But there's 6 other sources. One of the things that I did early on when I took the case was I held back information. And it was information that I felt like if the time ever came that I could say 100% without this piece of the puzzle, they don't know what they're talking about, because you hear everything. My witness gave me that piece of the puzzle, and it was the very final piece that I needed. And it was reported from a medical examiner, it was reported from Missouri State Highway Patrol, and it was in the reports, I just didn't put it out there. My witness said, and this happened, and that happened, and he raped her, and he overdosed her, and in between something else happened, and she's the only person in the world that knew it. I can tell you Taufi Reeves was a suspect in this case for years. I just couldn't get anybody to talk to me on the record as an affidavit. I couldn't corroborate their stories until years later, and I had nobody who had the missing piece until he died. And that's how we are here today. So I'm happy to tell you this case is going to be cleared by exception. And I, again, would be lying to you if I did not tell you that there's every possibility that there could be more down the road. And that's not to say we don't know who killed her. That's to say that there may be new things coming down the road. No? So I'm going to read the last line of this because there's a young man that's helped us immensely. So besides our sheriff and our prosecuting attorney and all of you guys, without all the support that we have received, we would not have been able to develop Shauna's story to its conclusion. We have provided you with the ending, but we would be remiss if we did not thank M. William Phelps for his tireless work on Shauna's life story. Now this sounds a little bit like I'm giving you a podcast or I'm making a plug. It's not that at all. This is a man who cared as much about giving her story, telling people how tragic her life was and that she wasn't invisible, and he's still doing that today. So he has a podcast called Paper Ghost. It's called The Ozarks, aptly enough, and that's important because that's Shauna's story. It's the only one I've got, really, to give you that I know is accurate. So he also talks about her death, but we'll be happy to take any questions. It's been a long road. There's been DNA, there's been lab work, there's been bindings, there's been fibers, there's been blood work. Name it, it's been there, it's done it, and this case was solved by taking the time to talk to some very dark people in some very dark places sometimes, and that's really how it was solved. That's all I got.
Is Mr. Reeves a suspect in other unsolved murders in this county?
We're not there yet.
Thank you.
You mean there's other suspects involved here? There may be other suspects involved. Is that what
I
you
mean
mean
to
there?
tell you, I know. I only give people what I know, what I can prove. What I can prove and what I know is that Mr. Reeves killed Shauna Garber, without a doubt. I know that. What I don't know, to the degree that I'm willing to stand up here and talk about it, is there potentially could be more to the story, but I know who killed her.
You mean there could be other people who were with him?
Maybe.
Maybe.
Have you found the owner of the truck?
Pardon me?
Who's the owner of the truck? You said it wasn't his truck.
It wasn't his truck.
So have you found
He
out?
borrowed the truck. I
So you-
spent, we spent forever getting wrapped around the axle looking for a registration for this vehicle, and I wasn't willing to put that information out there until I found the truck.
Have you found the owner and talked to the owner?
We have found the truck, and the owner is no longer with us either. And that's a problem that you have with cold cases. if I had known, if you had known, if we had known who Shauna was in 1990, it wouldn't have taken us this long, I don't think. I mean, I'd like to think that. But when you don't know who they are, and you have to figure out who they are, it's a lot.
What was her official cause of death? Was it strangulation, shooting?
The manner was undetermined. We said early on that we knew that she was raped. That was speculation, but it was right on. The reason that we knew is because of the way that she was tied. Shauna was tied in a gruesome manner. That's what led us to Dennis Rader. Because we'd be remiss if we didn't keep an open mind and look at that. She had more than 6 bindings that exceeded about that big on both her arms and her foot, and it was tied to a shoelace, which left one leg open. And it is speculation, but we later learned, that was in the beginning of the case, we later learned through our witnesses, through our sources, through our affidavits and statements and evidence that he did rape her. We just didn't know that early on. That was speculation early on by the way she was tied.
Early on, at one point, it was put out as information by the Sheriff's Department that an autopsy had determined that she was raped and strangled. Now it seems like you're walking back from the strangled part.
I am gonna walk back on the strangled part. I think the supposition at the time, and I'll tell you why. The supposition at the time, the manner of death had not been determined because of decomp. And I hate to say that in front of her family. I'm going to be honest with you, but this is how it is. She had been out there for 2 months. She had been out there from October 31st or the 27th, Halloween evening, until December the 2nd when she was found. It happened to be a warm winter, and the animals had gotten to her. They had drug her. Her skull was separated from her torso. Her torso was separated. We had just things that we had to put back together. And so the manner of death was due to the amount of decomp that he could not determine. But now when you look at something like that, you also have to look at, was there blunt force trauma? Was she hit over the head? No. There was no blunt force trauma in that she was not, we didn't see a gunshot wound, we didn't see a stab mark or a nick, we didn't see blunt force trauma in the head of the skull, which is sometimes what you see. There was no evidence of any other type or manner of death outside of a potential strangulation, which would, it is speculation, but you have 8 bindings, 6 that you know are big, thick rope, and she had a towel over her head and neck. So what led to the supposition that she was strangled was she had a rope around her neck. And the supposition that she was raped early on, we didn't know, but it was because she had one leg left out, and not a real good reason to do that unless you're going to rape your victim. Now, today, we know a lot more than we did back then, and we know that she absolutely was raped, but she also was overdosed to kill her.
You said she came to McDonald County as part of a work crew?
She did.
Are you talking about a county work crew or what?
You want to address that? You know the answers.
It was determined that she had come to McDonald County as part of a work program from over in Oklahoma. And that is how we think
A
she...
jail work program?
No, we believe it was a halfway house, and she had come to McDonald County as part of that work program.
And how did she come into contact with the suspect?
We have a source, an affidavit actually from a source. He picked her up on Missouri State Highway 59, which was between Hudson Foods and Ginger Blue, for those of you who are local. She was walking. She got just to the corner of the Tanglewood Apartments, and he picked her up there.
Was she staying at the Tanglewood Apartments?
It is my
work
belief,
crew?
and this I cannot tell you I know for 100% certain. This is speculation. Shauna's remains had a cloth linen napkin in the pocket. She also had a white Canon towel wrapped around her head with a coax cable around her head and neck. This bothered both of us for a very long time because I thought, well, okay, she was transient and working as a waitress perhaps. But ultimately what we believe happened, and I'm not going to tell you I know 100% this information, but I think I do. She was at Ginger Blue. She was coming back and forth on a work van to work at Hudson Foods at the time. We know it now as Tyson. And they were bringing people back from the Bonita Claremore area. We know the case from her caseworker from foster care that she was riding this van back and forth to work. She was only 22 years old. I don't think she lasted very long at Hudson Foods and decided not to get back on that van and took off walking. Ginger Blue at the time, and we've done extensive research with the owners and Ginger Blue, had a cloth white napkin on their tables. They also had white Canon towels that they provided for the people that stayed there. And they recently had put in cable TV with the coax cable that was found wrapped around her throat. So, I'm gonna tell you, I believe, based on where I know she was picked up, she more than likely was staying there at some point, or at least stayed one night there.
Are you suggesting that the suspect was in her room at one point?
I'm suggesting he picked her up on the highway because that's the only thing I can tell you for facts.
Was there anything that it could have been out of the decomposition body that could, a toxicology report could have, was there any toxicology reports?
Decomp, for the most part, had eliminated that prospect. We had very little of Shauna left by the end of those 2 months. We had tissue, we had fiber, clothing, bindings. What we didn't have a lot of was actual soft tissue remains.
Do you know what she was drugged with?
Yes, I did.
Can you release that?
It was methamphetamine.
Was that injected?
It was injected.
Did she show marks of that?
Pardon me?
Were there marks still visible?
I have not been able to read anything regarding that, but to find marks, you almost always have to have a body that's somewhat intact, tissue that you can look at. That didn't exist for her.
You've never said, when did he die? And how did he die?
November 15th.
November 15th of 2021.
2021.
And how did he die?
Motor vehicle accident.
And I guess you said he was familiar, and people were fighting him. There's any other criminal cases?
Oh, yes. Dating back to the early 80s.
Hadn't he been a victim of an assault himself?
It's speculation, but I'm absolutely 100% certain. I mean, we're talking about a guy who had just a plethora, for lack of a better word, of charges against him from early 80s on.
What was the most serious?
Geez.
He had a first-degree assault.
He had a first-degree assault, but he had controlled substance, trafficking, fleeing, eluding, tampering.
Any other sex offenses?
Pardon me?
Any other sex offenses?
I have not seen any sex offenses, no.
No.
The witness, was this someone that knew
Yes.
Reeves?
Yes.
You might have said it, but how old was Reeves at the time of the incident?
He was born in 62, I believe. I want to make sure that that's right before I say that. But I believe he was born in 62. That'll be right here. Oh, yeah, that's in the birthday. I'll give you his birthday. What I can tell you about Mr. Reeves, we were aware of him for a lot of years. 63. He was born in 63. We were aware of Mr. Reeves due to his criminal history. It's extensive. But I mean, just knowing about him and knowing what he's capable of, and just because people say that something happened, you never pin anything on that. I mean, if you get tunnel vision as a cold case detective, you might as well hang it up. You can't afford to ever get tunnel vision. So that's, even though he's been in our file forever, it seems, we didn't want to do anything until we knew. Like, we knew.
Can you say again, explain again that letter the former sheriff sent?
Yeah. At the time I was,
Relevance to this?
yeah, at the time I was working under Sheriff Donald Schlushman, and he came through. I didn't know about Shauna. We'll see you, Leah. Thank you, thank you. Always appreciate it. I didn't know about Shauna, didn't know about Grace. It was weird how that story even came about, but the letter, he came through and he said, look at this. And it was not a new letter at that time. And I read through it, and it talked about a young girl, it talked about how she was killed and where she was killed, and very specific information.
Was it an anonymous thing?
No, it was not.
Who sent it to who?
It was not. It was sent to the sheriff's office, and the person put their name on it.
Are you releasing the letter, or?
I haven't released that letter. And again, this sounds like I'm being vague, and I am. I have people associated with this case that I'm not going to put in harm's way. I can't.
So the letter didn't come from the suspect?
No. The letter did not come from the suspect. No. And honestly, while I did everything I could with the letter at the time, at that point it was still even years old, but I did what I could with the letter, but I just couldn't verify that everything in the letter was true and accurate. What I much later learned is that it was very true and very accurate, according to 6 sources and 2 witnesses, and a whole lot of DNA that corroborated that.
Sounds like one of 2 things. Either the letter writer was present when this happened,
You could say
or he or she learned from someone who was present.
that. You could say that.
These details.
You could say that.
But you don't know which one that
I do know.
is. You do know.
I do know.
So
You're not-
You're not releasing it?
Yeah.
I'm not going to release the letter. Folks, again,
We have, sorry,
no, do it.
we have to take into consideration that there are still people that could be put in harm's way by us releasing certain details.
And they're
If
fearful.
if that statement is if that's a factual statement, that more people could be harmed to this day, that means, that's what I'm hearing is there was more than one person that possibly killed her, and there's
Tell me.
other people out there.
I'm sorry for interrupting you. Talfi killed her. When we say that there's other people and that there's potentially harm, what happens is, and this is not surprising to any one of you, I wouldn't think, you do this every day. You have a group of people in your county, and they make crime their living. They make crime their lifestyle. And they associate with other people who make crime their lifestyle. And they're dangerous. And especially if we're talking about drug-related offenses, or we're talking about sex trafficking, or we're talking about those types of things. So what happens is people glean a lot of information, and you take that information and you try to figure out if there's any validity to it. And that takes a great deal of work. And we were able to determine that he killed her, but there's still that group of people out there that were living during that time frame that are dangerous people. I don't want to see anybody else get hurt.
So these 2 witnesses were potentially in the car and witnessed everything. He just acted alone in harming her.
One witness in particular saw and knows everything that happened. The other individual saw Shauna, but it was several days later.
And when you say that one saw Shauna, you mean saw her body?
Saw her body. Saw her body. One of the witnesses saw her body within moments of her being killed.
So one saw the actual killing and one saw the actual body. We've got 2 separate witnesses.
Correct. There's 2 separate witnesses. One saw the actual body, and in her mind was able to verify everything by seeing, looking, hearing, knowing. The other one saw the body, but there was a gap.
So the female witnessed the murder, and the second witness saw the
her
body.
after the fact.
You've said multiple times that you're 100% sure that this person is the guy.
Yes.
What led you to believe that this is 100% the person?
Honestly, I took 6 different people, 6 different sources, and there's actually many more than that, but I discounted. a lot of them, just because I couldn't prove it in my own mind. These folks laid out for me everything that happened. I then took those statements, went back again for consistency's sake, and back again, actually for years. And ultimately, I put all of these out there. They wrote me an affidavit. I looked to see what the common denominators were, and if there were any inconsistencies, if there was anything that needed to be clearer, and there wasn't. These folks did not have a relationship per se with each other. And then I had my witness, which is extremely credible, but fearful. Again, I can't say that enough. And I held a piece back. Back in the day, there was one piece of information, and I'm so thankful that I did that, because I don't, well, it's not that I don't think, I know that's never been released. And my witness said, and you know that this happened. And
Does that piece of information have to do with the condition of the body, or?
yes,
Are you able
I
to
would
release
say-
that bit of information that,
not just yet. I'm not gonna say that I won't release that ultimately, but not today.
during the course of the investigation, you had touched on a little bit, you were sitting down with the likes of Larry Hall and Dennis Rader, picking their brain. What was that process like in order to ascertain the identity of the real killer?
Well, again, like I said, if I had early on gotten tunnel vision, I don't think we'd even be here today. I say that about every investigator. If you have something in your mind and you're not going to veer from that, what's going to happen is you're going to try to make that outcome what you want it to be as opposed to what it really is. So I don't do that. She doesn't do that. We try to always keep an open mind. We went and talked to Dennis Rader. We talked to him for hours and hours, and he's an evil man. I'm not going to sugarcoat that. He's an evil man. But I learned from him. She learned from him, because we were able to take information, much like this. I think this whole binder right here might even be in regards to Dennis Rader. We were able to pass information. This is public information, these codes, this type of thing, it's out there on the internet. We would put it in front of him, and he became a different person. He lit up, he wanted to talk about it, he was reliving his crimes, a lot happened. And we would continue to put his work in front of him, and it was amazing to see the transformation in him. So then, I put everything I had of Shauna in front of him. And I will tell you, there was a complete and utter look of disgust. He even said, "This is terrible. This is overkill. Who would do this? This is sloppy." It's not my work. And it wasn't his work, and I knew it immediately, because he's meticulous in his crimes. He's meticulous in his planning. He's meticulous with everything he does, even today. He keeps records, and he would stalk his victims for days on end. And he was horrified that somebody would work so sloppily.
Had Rader ever said anything that made him a suspect in your mind?
Rader was only
Or was
a
this
rabbit
just
hole for me.
speculation on part of people who heard that your victim was bound?
Yeah, no, that's a lot of it. That's a lot of it. Anytime somebody says, "Wow, look at that, that's massive and it's overkill," who do we know that could have been responsible for something like that? Bind, torture, kill, of course. So you can't close anything off ever, and we didn't. But it didn't take but moments to know that he considered this the work of somebody who was crazy, frantic, sloppy. He was disgusted with it.
On identification of the body, what time these bones were missing?
They were.
They had disappeared.
She was
Then they
missing.
showed up in the University of Arkansas.
She was missing.
They were teaching schools at the University of Arkansas. And did that ever pose chain of custody issues for identification?
No, and I'll tell you why. Initially, in our reports, when I finally found reports, that's exactly how it was reported, and that's all I knew. But when I finally found her, she was in Boone County, Missouri, at the medical examiner's office. her skeletal remains had never left the medical examiner's office from when she was sent there.
Oh, I thought they had shown up.
That was reported. That was reported. And early on, I had a lot of misinformation that I had to clear up.
Okay.
And ultimately, what happened is I had to drive to Boone County, Missouri, not only to receive her skeletal remains, but then I had to go somewhere else at the coroner's office to find her clothing and bindings.
Okay, so that was mistaken.
That was.
She was always at the Boone County
Yep.
Medical.
She sure was. Yeah, and I kind of knew that.
What was sent to that forensic place in Texas that,
I took a fingernail from her before I actually had her skull.
so her body wasn't sent to Texas?
No.
Just a fingernail and,
I sent a fingernail for mitochondrial DNA, and then ultimately I sent a molar for nuclear DNA to get into CODIS. Now, actually, Mike Hall ended up sending a femur, I think it was it not, Mike? To determine familial DNA, so that
so a fingerprint and a femur to confirm female DNA?
fingernail was mitochondrial DNA. It's because that's all I had at the time. At that point, I only had her clothes. Later, had the skeletal remains, and I sent a back tooth, to get her into CODIS. And then
that was to UNT.
yeah, and that was for the University of North Texas Health and Human Sciences.
And then Mike Hall sent the femur to Othram to be able to.
That's the one I was thinking
Yeah,
about.
yeah. They like to have new DNA. Othram likes to have something that's available still today, as opposed to something that's in the system or a DNA.
And the molar went to North Texas State?
Correct. Yes.
The case is officially closed, but I know you said that some things may come to light later. Do you guys plan on continuing to investigate?
Always.
Yeah, it's a never-ending story.
Because I still have holes. I want a picture of her.
We want to know where she was as a child.
Yeah. I mean, that's not pertinent to how she died. I know how she died. But it's pertinent to know how she lived.
The sources you have anything? The sources you mentioned saying that, they were fearful of coming forward until after he passed away, was this someone of power or maybe in some type of ring that you mentioned drugs and whatnot? Like, do we have any more information on the suspect and who he was in the community?
Yes, we have a great deal of information on the suspect and who he was in the community. He was a menace to the community, but you can't.
Was he a
place-
low-level player? Was he?
No.
Was he a big fish in a small pond?
He was a big fish in a big pond.
He was from Pineville.
He actually moved several places in McDonald County, but for the most part, Pineville, Lanigan area.
Had he lived in McDonald County all his life, or did he have any ties to Oklahoma?
He had ties to Oklahoma, he had ties to Arkansas, and that was drug-related to the extent of my knowledge. I'm not gonna tell you I know everything about his entire life, I don't. What I know is that I know that he was trafficking in drugs, I know that he was convicted of that, I know that that's on his criminal history, so those are factual. I know that he was running from Oklahoma to Missouri to Arkansas in trafficking. Not just trafficking, but stealing and a whole number of other things.
Where in Oklahoma? Tulsa or?
I'm told Tulsa,
Miami.
but that
Craig County?
I would be remiss if I said I know exactly his goings on. I know he had dealings in Oklahoma due to a case that is not mine to talk about. That's an FBI case. So
Okay,
I
so
know
is it the Welch girls?
I can't talk about it. I can't talk about it because I don't know enough to speak intelligently about the case in Oklahoma. It's not my jurisdiction and I can't talk about that. But I know he has ties in Oklahoma for those various reasons. And also in Arkansas because, he was in Missouri DOC for a period of time. We checked all of those records. He was in Oklahoma DOC for a period of time.
He actually never went to Oklahoma DOC, but I believe he was on a probationary
he was on a
period there.
probationary period, yeah.
So if you have any other witnesses that want to come forward, how can they contact you guys?
They can always contact 911. They can always contact the sheriff's office. We receive lots and lots of heads up.
And a lot of times if we're not immediately available, Sheriff Evenson will forward that information to us and we'll dig into it collectively.
Has anyone looked into the possibility of a connection of him to the suspects? Welch girls?
Yes.
Who's done that? Have you?
I have not, it's not my jurisdiction.
Can you talk about anything with the Welch girls?
No. You'll have to talk to those folks over there.
But there is a connection.
We can't speak to it because we
I
don't know.
can't speak to it. It's not my jurisdiction and I can't intelligently talk about
But
it.
he did run with the Welch girl suspects.
I'm just not gonna commit to that.
You mentioned Reeves' death, how it sparked a lot of conversations. Witnesses were finally maybe comfortable talking to you guys. Do you contribute that to be a breaking point in the case? Talk to me about that a little bit and how big of a deal his death was in all this.
All right, I'll tell you, I talked to Talpi years ago, and I told him in no uncertain terms, even back then, still yet keeping my mind open because I couldn't prove anything. I told him, I went to his house, actually, and I said, before you die, I want to be your last phone call because I want to know what happened to her. And he laughed and he smiled, and that was pretty much the extent of what I got from him verbally.
Was that your final conversation with him?
Yes, it was.
And talk about you a little bit. You've been through this journey for, what, over 30 years now? Could you talk about that? How does it feel to be closing this case? And I know, work is not done.
Emotional.
You're going to continue to work, but can you talk to me about that a little bit?
Yeah, I'm emotional. Obviously, I'm emotional. She and I both, we didn't solve this sitting behind a computer. We didn't solve this all of the traditional ways that people like to see cases solved. Yes, there was a lot of that happened, a lot of lab work, a lot of DNA, a lot of those fiber works. But what happened is we consistently kept finding those people that we knew. And you just gotta keep doing that. It's a work of passion. But I told Shauna from day one, because I had to find her and then I had to beg people to help me with her, and I showed up on everybody's doorstep asking for, anything and everything in regards to her. But I told her I wouldn't give up on her. Because even before I knew who she was, I knew she had a hard life. She was missing, and I didn't have family out there looking. I didn't have posters up everywhere. I didn't have a big missing persons report. I had nothing. It's as if she was just invisible, and I knew she'd had a hard life as a result of that. And then, of course, when I found out she was Shauna, I just didn't even realize how hard of a life she had. And so I just told her from day one, I said, I'm not going to give up on you. Hang in here with me, and we'll get to the end of this deal. But I wanted to get it right. I didn't want to just end it. I wanted to make sure that I had it right.
And there was a lot of work done by a lot of other investigators.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Between us. And all of those things were big parts a lot of times, Finding out who she was a big part to this.
Yep.
Because from there we could start piecing together where she had been, we knew who to look at for, talking to as far as if anybody knew anything about her.
And she did have burn scars. She did have burn scars on her, which helped in the process when our sources say, oh, by the way, you should know. We already knew. But it helped when they said, by the way, you should know.
When
She
you
had
say
scars.
the investigation is still ongoing as far as figuring out what her child life was
Mhm.
like, what are the next steps in that process?
Can I speak to it?
Yeah, absolutely.
We were actually granted a subpoena this morning to be able to obtain records from the Kansas Department of Children's and Families from their foster care stuff. So we're going to send that out and see what that brings to light for us.
I mean, it's not necessary, I guess, in a cold case to know what they did prior to bringing them here, where she ultimately was killed. But gosh, she doesn't have to be invisible. I just want people to know what she looked like. And
Where was her foster?
Kansas, lots of places
Where
actually.
in Kansas?
Shawnee,
Several places.
yeah, she had many.
In
She
the
lived in Kansas.
Shawnee area?
The Shawnee Mission area.
Dodge City,
Dodge City, Garden City,
Garnett.
Garnett, She actually was in Kansas City, Missouri at one point when she was adopted.
So how many
Was she
foster
in-
families did she live with?
I
Don't know that
We don't know
definitively.
a complete number, but I feel comfortable in saying we know of 4.
How'd she end up in a halfway house in Oklahoma?
When the caseworker, her caseworker said she had aged out of the system, she was going to find extended family. She was going to find cousins or somebody that was related to the foster family, not necessarily her own biological family. And the caseworker said she went to the Veneta Claremore area to make that happen.
Did she get in trouble with the law, or did she?
I don't think
Was
she,
she in a halfway house?
yeah, I don't have any
Repeating
records,
questions
so
here,
she
but
was
we'll tell
ever
you the
charged with anything. There's no criminal
Male
history
in
for her,
question died in
obviously.
November of 2021.
But she had trauma.
Talfie Reeves.
We know that because early on when
T-A-L-F-E-Y,
she was a child, it was a failed adoption due to
R-E-E-V-E-S.
the trauma of her life. And
Died in a motor
It's-
vehicle crash.
it's 100% believed that she went to a halfway house because something happened in Veneta and
Tap your screen,
Claremore
click the bit
that
link.
kept her from finding
Details should be
family
there in
or
the full article.
a stable environment. And that's how she ended up driving back
Website
and forth on the
gateway
van
now.
to find work here.
And really quickly, when was the last time we did anything publicly with this case? I know today, obviously, when was the last time we did anything publicly with this case?
Probably when she was identified.
March
Yeah, of course,
31st, 2021.
Of
I
course.
know we had one,
Mhm.
I had one a couple of years ago when they were trying to do a digital
Yeah.
DNA.
Yeah, of course, 2020, that would be correct, 2021, I can.
March 31st.
We did have to speak about her a little bit whenever they were trying to make the association between BTK and Shauna,
yes.
but and that was last year. But other than that, the public point for this would be when they were able to obtain the familial DNA and her identity.
So was it when you guys obtained the familial DNA that I know the half sister is here today? She came into the picture at that point.
And actually, I can't answer that particular question. Mike might be able to answer that particular question.
When Othram was able to get to a familiar DNA, we were given a list of possible matches to go to the highest match, and I was able to get a hold of Danielle, her half-sister, and she did a DNA for us, and then it matched. Othram submitted it back in, and that's when it matched to, and that was in December of 2020, and then everything was confirmed through Othram the next part of early part of next year.
She has a brother as well. He reached out to her several times over, to the caseworker. He reached out with several letters, and I'll let you talk to him if you want to talk to him, but briefly what happened is he tried to tell her when you age out of the system, somebody cares about you. So I'm here if you need a place to go. We now know that those letters were in the caseworker's drawer and was never delivered to Shauna. So she still never knew she had anybody. If that's it, I mean, feel free if you guys have questions later. If anything pops up, anything on your mind, we'll be happy to talk about it. Thank you guys for coming.
Yes, thank you very much. The last thing I'll add is that Lori and I like to say that we had to sit down with evil to find grace. And that's ultimately what we had
That
to do.
sounds funny, but let me tell you, I could have just stood up here today and said that. I
And
think
that
we
would have been
could
an
done.
explanation of all of it. But thank you guys very much.
Thank you.
And again, if you didn't get the digital, or if you want the digital photos, please see me and let me write down your email addresses so that I can make sure that you get those.
Should have had my card. Somebody
Perfect.
might already.
Yes, he does. He does.
I just want to, let me know the unsolved cases.
We've been asked to work on a lot of them. Some of them are our jurisdiction, some of them are not. We have a young lady, she's next. We're familiar, we've been, again, around the world with her.
Is that the McDonald County case too?
It is, yeah. So we have another young lady we're gonna work on. We have an older man. Feel good about that one. We know who he is, we know what happened. We're gonna knock that out.
However, I will tell you, we were instructed by our sheriff to finish this one before we start another one. We still have a lot of reports to write and
It takes
this,
a
that,
lot.
and another, and just take a breather for a minute before we embark on the other one. And the other thing is that it wasn't just the sheriff's office and investigators that did this. We had help from various county offices. We went to our recorder's office about 3 weeks ago
And drove her crazy.
and drove her crazy. She stayed after one night helping us look through plot maps and records and everything else, just trying to get all of the things that we needed. So we couldn't have done it without everybody's help.
Hundreds of people, but we've got a good sheriff. We were blessed to work under Sheriff Donald Schlesman. We were blessed to work under Sheriff Robert Evenson. The man cares about his county. Sheriff Evenson takes care of everything that happens during every day, but still sees that those things that happened way back then still get taken care of too, and that's a blessing.
And Mike Hall, when he was sheriff, he did lots of work on
He
it.
did lots of work on it.
It wasn't just a few investigators that did it. It was a whole pool of investigators that made this happen.
So again, thanks you guys.
Thank you.
Yes. Perfect, thank you. Billy.
I just didn't see that I was texting Bobby.